A billionaire's son was dying, invisible cells eating his life away from the inside, and his only hope lay in the hands of a woman who was paid $15 an hour to mop the hospital floors 3 stories below him. This is the staggering true story of an elite tech titan who believed his algorithms could conquer any human crisis, completely blind to the fact that his own son was breathing solely because an anonymous night shift janitor was quietly draining her own veins every 30 days for free. Stay with us until the very end, because the breathtaking moment their 2 opposite worlds violently collide in a freezing midnight parking lot will forever change the way you look at the invisible heroes walking among us. The human body holds approximately 5 liters of blood, a silent, crimson river navigating a labyrinth of 60,000 miles of vessels, a closed ecosystem of survival. In the sterile, fluorescent reality of St. Jude Children's Memorial Hospital in Chicago, that river was drying up for a 4-year-old boy named Elijah Fairfax. His affliction was automated treason, autoimmune hemolytic anemia, a phantom warfare where the immune system, designed to guard the perimeter of life, turns inward, misidentifying its own red blood cells as foreign invaders and slaughtering them with mechanical indifference. Without intervention, his hemoglobin counts would plummet toward 0, his skin taking on the translucent, waxy texture of parchment paper, his vital organs shutting down one by one like a city losing its power grid during a winter storm. Elijah required a specific currency to survive, AB-negative blood, the most elusive currency on Earth, found in less than 1% of the global population. It cannot be manufactured in a laboratory, synthesized from polymers, or modeled by algorithms. It requires a human container, a living, breathing vessel willing to open a vein and let their own life force pour into a plastic pouch. For 24 consecutive months, a single unit of AB-negative blood had arrived on the 7th floor of the hospital like clockwork. The boy's father, Julian Fairfax, was a man who commanded an empire valued at $4.2 billion. His company, Medicore AI, used advanced machine learning models to map rare pediatric pathogens across 47 countries. His face had graced the cover of Forbes twice, and he had stood at the podium in Davos, lecturing global leaders on how silicon and predictive analytics would eventually render human medical error obsolete. Yet, as he sat in the leather recliner of room 714, the hospital's premier VIP suite overlooking the dark, wind-whipped expanse of Lake Michigan, Julian Fairfax was entirely powerless. He was a man who could alter stock markets with a single text message, but he could not command a single bone marrow cell to produce the hemoglobin his son needed to survive the night. He was completely dependent on an anonymous ghost. 3 floors below the opulent sanctuary of the VIP wing, that ghost was pushing a gray rubber maintenance cart down a corridor that smelled of high-grade industrial bleach and faded grief. Her name was Amara Osei. She was 35 years old, though the deep, bracketed lines around her mouth and the permanent tension in her shoulders suggested a much older architecture. She was a certified nursing assistant, a CNA, the absolute lowest tier of the hospital's medical hierarchy, earning $15.40 an hour. Every single night, from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., Amara inhabited the background of the hospital. She was the person who emptied the stainless steel bedpans, who wiped down the laminate tray tables after the cold dinners were abandoned, who changed the soiled linens of patients too weak to lift their own hips. She was a vital gear in the machine of human salvage, yet she occupied a space of total cultural and social invisibility. Doctors walked past her in the halls as if she were a piece of architectural molding. Nurses issued instructions without shifting their gaze from their electronic medical record screens. And every 30 days, at the precise conclusion of her grueling 12-hour shift, when her feet throbbed within cheap nursing clogs that had lost their support 6 months prior, Amara did not walk to the bus stop. Instead, she walked down the hidden basement corridor toward the hospital's blood donor center. She sat in a vinyl chair, rolled up the sleeve of her faded navy scrubs, and allowed a phlebotomist to drive a 16-gauge needle into the antecubital vein of her left arm. She gave away 500 milliliters of her own body, free of charge, before going home to a cramped apartment where the radiator hissed like an angry snake and her own mother sat attached to a machine that washed her dying kidneys. Two individuals, living under the exact same roof, bound by a literal river of shared cells, yet separated by 3 floors of reinforced concrete and an insurmountable wall of structural anonymity. It was an equilibrium built on silence. But silence, in a place where people come to die, is an unstable foundation. The night shift at St. Jude Children's Memorial did not begin with medicine. It began with the logistics of waste. At 6:45 p.m., Amara stood in the windowless locker room in the basement, tying her hair back into a severe, functional bun. The mirror above the sink was cracked at the corner, reflecting a distorted image of her dark skin and the heavy, purple shadows beneath her eyes. She adjusted the plastic ID badge clipped to her V-neck line. The badge read, Amara Osei, CNA. It carried no title of distinction, no honorary initials. It was simply a clearance pass for labor. Amara had arrived in Chicago 80 years earlier from Accra, Ghana. She had arrived with a single hard-sided suitcase that smelled of her mother's palm nut soup, 2 advanced textbooks on organic chemistry she had bought secondhand in a market, and a scholarship that covered full tuition at the University of Illinois Chicago's pre-med program. In Accra, she had been a prodigy, the girl who could memorize the structural formulas of amino acids before she had ever seen a digital microscope. Her mother, Denise, had worked 3 separate jobs to pay for Amara's secondary school uniform, selling colorful Kent cloth at the Macola market in the blistering morning heat, cleaning the offices of foreign diplomats in the afternoon, and washing laundry by hand under the pale yellow glow of a single street lamp at night. You are going to be the one who heals, Denise had told her, her hands rough and white from lye soap as she packed her daughter's suitcase. You have the mind for it, Amara. You have the heart. Do not look back at the dirt we came from. Look at the white coat. For 2.5 years, Amara had looked at nothing else. She had maintained a 3.98 GPA. She had spent her weekends in the university's chemistry lab, her fingers stained with silver nitrate, her mind sharp and predatory when it came to solving biological puzzles. Her professors spoke of her as a certainty for Johns Hopkins or Harvard Medical School. She was a rising star, a testament to the American dream of meritocracy. Then, during the first semester of her junior year, the phone call came from Ghana. It was a cousin speaking from a noisy clinic in Accra. Denise had collapsed near the market. Her blood pressure was astronomical. Her kidneys were scarred and shrunken from decades of undiagnosed, untreated hypertension. She was in stage 3 chronic kidney disease, rapidly cascading toward stage 4. There was no infrastructure for long-term maintenance dialysis in her neighborhood that she could afford. Without immediate intervention, without specialized medications and eventual relocation to a facility with advanced renal capabilities, she would be dead within a year. Amara had sat on the linoleum floor of her dorm room, surrounded by index cards covered in notes on the Krebs cycle, and pulled out a yellow legal pad. She did the math. The cost of bringing her mother to the United States on a medical visa, securing health insurance that wouldn't immediately exclude her for a pre-existing condition, paying the astronomical copays for thrice-weekly hemodialysis, and buying the erythropoietin injections needed to keep her from becoming profoundly anemic. It amounted to roughly $3,000 a month out of pocket. Her scholarship paid for her tuition and a meager room and board stipend. It did not pay for human survival. There was no choice. The concept of choice belongs to those who have a safety net, and Amara had only the air beneath her feet. She withdrew from the university 3 semesters short of her degree. She surrendered her lab coats, her research stipend, and her future status as a physician. She took an accelerated 6-week course to become a certified nursing assistant because hospitals were always short of support staff, and the job offered immediate, albeit meager, dental and health insurance options that could eventually be extended to a dependent parent. She went from analyzing the molecular weight of proteins to scraping dried feces off the thighs of geriatric patients. She went from being a mind to being a back. You're behind on your floor turnover, Osei. A voice barked from the doorway of the supply closet. Amara snapped back to the present. Standing in the doorway was Marcus Webb, the night shift custodial and support services supervisor. Marcus was a man who wore his authority like a cheap suit, stiff, ill-fitting, and loud. He had never held a clinical license, but he possessed an uncanny, almost religious devotion to the metrics of efficiency. To Marcus, a hospital was not a house of healing. It was a logistics hub where compassion was a non-reimbursable waste of billable minutes. I am pulling the linens for 314 now, Marcus, Amara said, her voice even, devoid of the accent that many of her colleagues used as an excuse to speak to her more slowly. You have 14 rooms to clear before the midnight rounds, Marcus said, not looking at her as he checked boxes on his digital tablet. And I saw the log from last week. You spent 20 minutes in 308 after the patient was cleared for discharge. The room wasn't turned over until 1:15 a.m. That drags down our unit average. The patient was an 8-year-old girl with a compound fracture whose mother hadn't arrived from work yet, Amara said softly, her fingers tightening around a stack of folded white sheets. She was frightened. That's what social work is for. Marcus snapped, his eyes finally lifting to meet hers with a cold, administrative glare. You're a CNA, Amara, not a child psychologist. Clean the space, empty the buckets, and move to the next unit. If I see your name on another delay log, I'm writing you up for insubordination. There are 50 people on a waiting list who want your hours. I understand, Amara said. She did not argue. Arguing with a man who holds the authority to terminate your health insurance is a luxury reserved for those who do not have a mother sitting in a dialysis chair at a clinic across town. She pushed her cart past him into the hallway. The third floor was the general pediatric ward. It was a noisy, chaotic ecosystem of low-income families, broken limbs, asthma attacks, and the harsh, constant smell of cheap industrial floor wax. It was the world of the $15 an hour workers. Here, the walls were painted a dull, scuffed yellow, and the television monitors in the rooms were small, outdated boxes that hummed with static. Amara worked with a methodical, rhythmic intensity. She did not look at the clock. She knew that if she allowed herself to think about the remaining 8 hours of her shift, the ache in her lumbar spine would become paralyzing. She wiped down the stainless steel rails of a crib. She collected 3 bags of biohazardous waste. She assisted an overweight nurse named Brenda in turning a teenage boy who had been paralyzed in a drive-by shooting, holding his heavy, unresponsive body against her chest while Brenda packed his sacral pressure ulcers with medicated gauze. Nice work, Amara, Brenda muttered, her forehead slick with sweat as she snapped off her latex gloves. Don't know how you keep your energy up. I feel like my knees are about to explode. We are almost to the halfway point, Amara said, offering a small, practiced smile. Yeah, well, some people have it easier, Brenda said, nodding toward the ceiling. You hear about what's going on up on 7? The Fairfax kid is back in. The billionaire's son. Amara paused, a bottle of disinfectant spray in her hand. The tech CEO? Yeah, Julian Fairfax. The guy whose company put those big AI screens in the yard down there. They say he's got his own private security detail outside the room, and they're importing food from some Italian place downtown because the hospital cafeteria isn't good enough for them. Must be nice to have that kind of money when your kid gets sick. Disease does not read a bank statement. Brenda, Amara said quietly, turning back to her cart. Maybe not, Brenda sighed, but it sure provides a better view while you're waiting for the end. The view from room 714 was spectacular, if one had the emotional capacity to appreciate it. The floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the shoreline of Chicago, where the headlights of cars on Lake Shore Drive crawled like a luminescent snake through the dark autumn drizzle. The room itself resembled a boutique hotel suite rather than a clinical environment. The floors were engineered hardwood. The walls were painted a soft, calming sage green, and the standard hospital recliner had been replaced with a deep, slate-gray leather armchair imported from Denmark. Julian Fairfax sat in that armchair, a thin, silver laptop resting on his thighs. The screen reflected off the lenses of his designer glasses, casting a pale blue light across a face that was taut with exhaustion. He was 46 years old, but the last 2 years had etched deep, permanent grooves into his forehead and around the corners of his mouth. His hair, once a solid, youthful dark brown, was now shot through with thick ribbons of silver at the temples. In the center of the room, beneath a crisp white duvet made of Egyptian cotton rather than the standard scratchy hospital muslin, lay his 4-year-old son, Elijah. The boy was tiny, his frame swallowed by the bed. His skin had a distinct, sickly yellow undertone, the unmistakable hallmark of jaundice caused by the massive, ongoing destruction of his red blood cells. A pulse oximeter clip on his left index finger glowed with a small, rhythmic red light, its readings hovering precariously at 91%. Beside the bed stood a tall four-pole. Hanging from its chrome hook was a clear plastic bag containing 500 milliliters of dense, dark crimson fluid. It was packed red blood cells, group AB, Rh negative. The liquid was dripping slowly through a microfilter chamber, traveling down a thin silicone tube and entering a cannula inserted into the saphenous vein of Elijah's ankle. Julian's eyes traveled from his laptop screen to the dripping blood bag, then down to his son's face. He felt a familiar, corrosive sensation in his gut, a toxic mixture of profound gratitude and absolute, blinding rage. Julian was a man who had built his entire life on the premise that any problem could be solved if you broke it down into its constituent data points, applied sufficient computational power, and optimized the algorithm. His company, Metacore AI, had been born from that exact philosophy. They had built neural networks that analyzed hundreds of thousands of medical histories to detect early-stage oncological mutations in children before a human radiologist could see them on an MRI. He had saved thousands of children he would never meet. Yet, when his own son's body had begun its self-destructive descent 2 years prior, the algorithms had offered no answers. The diagnosis was definitive: severe, refractory autoimmune hemolytic anemia. Elijah's spleen was an active slaughterhouse, destroying his own blood cells faster than his bone marrow could replicate them. The only bridge to survival was continuous, monthly blood transfusions to maintain his oxygen levels while they cycled through various immunosuppressive therapies that had so far failed to yield a permanent remission. The door to the suite clicked open with a soft, expensive pneumatic hiss. Dr. Lorraine Becky stepped into the room. She was the head of pediatric hematology, a woman of South African descent with an aura of immense, unshakable calm. She wore her white coat over tailored black trousers, a stethoscope draped around her neck like a symbol of office. "How are his latest labs, Lorraine?" Julian asked, his voice low, raspy from lack of sleep and too many cups of black espresso. He closed his laptop with a sharp click. Dr. Mbeki walked to the bedside, her fingers lightly touching Elijah's small, warm forehead before checking the settings on the infusion pump. "His bilirubin is still elevated, Julian, which tells us the hemolysis is active. But this unit is holding. His hemoglobin should tick up to 7.5 by tomorrow morning. It's stabilizing him, just like last month." Julian stood up, pacing toward the window, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his tailored trousers. "And the donor? Is it the same source?" "Yes," Dr. Mbeki said, her voice careful, neutral. "It is the same individual who provided the units for his last 5 transfusions. The profile remains perfectly consistent." "I want to know who they are, Lorraine," Julian said, turning around to face her. His eyes were hard, the eyes of an executive accustomed to demanding compliance from vendors and board members. "I've asked the blood bank director 3 times this week. He keeps giving me the same bureaucratic runaround about federal guidelines and donor privacy. It's absurd. I am not looking to harass anyone. I want to put this person on a retainer. I want to buy them a house next to the hospital. I want to guarantee that my son's lifeline isn't dependent on whether a stranger decides to show up at a donation center on a rainy Tuesday." Dr. Mbeki sighed, a soft, patient sound. She had gone through this exact conversation with Julian several times over the past 18 months. "Julian, the laws regarding donor anonymity are not arbitrary hospital policy. They are federal mandates under the National Organ Transplant Act and FDA regulations. The entire architecture of the voluntary blood supply in this country relies on the absolute separation of donor and recipient." "Everything has a price, Lorraine," Julian said, his voice tightening with frustration. "Don't lecture me on regulations. I fund half the research budget of this entire oncology wing. If I pull my endowment, if you pull your endowment, children with leukemia will die, and the rules will still not change," Dr. Mbeki interrupted, her tone sharp enough to cut through his executive entitlement. She stepped closer to him, her voice softening but retaining its iron core. "Listen to me, Julian. The anonymity protects the donor from the exact type of pressure you are describing. If a donor knows their blood is going to the child of a man worth $4 billion, the relationship ceases to be an act of altruism. It becomes an economic transaction. It creates leverage. It invites exploitation. The system works precisely because it is blind. Julian looked away, staring back at the plastic bag of blood hanging above his son. It's a terrifying kind of blindness, he muttered. My son's heart keeps beating because of 500 milliliters of fluid that comes out of a person whose name I don't know, whose face I've never seen. They could be a drug addict. They could be a white supremacist. They could be anyone. They are someone who chooses to give a piece of themselves to save a 4-year-old boy they will never meet, for no compensation other than a cup of juice and a cookie, Dr. Mbeki said quietly. In my line of work, Julian, we do not call that terrifying. We call it grace. You should try to accept it as such. She turned back to the bed, adjusted the blanket around Elijah's shoulders, and made a notation on her tablet. On the screen, for a fraction of a second, the donor code was visible, a string of alphanumeric characters linked to a file deep within the secure servers of the central blood bank. Dr. Mbeki knew the name attached to that code. She saw it every month when the cross-matching reports landed on her desk. She knew the woman who gave it. She had seen her in the hallways at 4 a.m., pushing a mop through the puddles of dirty water, her face gray with exhaustion. But Dr. Mbeki had taken an oath, and she believed in the integrity of that oath the way Julian believed in the efficiency of his code. She closed the file, nodded to Julian, and walked out of the room, leaving the billionaire alone with the rhythmic, mechanical ticking of the pump that was driving a stranger's life into his only child. At 7:10 a.m., the sky over Chicago was the color of dirty dishwater. Amara walked out of the third-floor staff room, her coat draped over her arm. Her bones felt heavy, as if they had been filled with wet sand during the course of her shift. She had spent the last 2 hours scrubbing the isolation rooms on the oncology unit, a task that required a double layer of personal protective equipment that left her skin slick with sweat and smelling faintly of latex. She reached the main lobby. To her right lay the exit, leading to the bus stop where the CTA line would take her north toward her apartment. To her left lay the long, quiet corridor that led to the donor center. Amara did not hesitate. She turned left. The donor center was clean, quiet, and largely empty at this hour of the morning. The walls were painted a bright, cheerful white, and a row of adjustable blue vinyl recliners lined the back wall, each equipped with an automated agitation scale for blood bags. Behind the reception desk sat Sarah, a nurse who had worked in the blood bank for 20 years. "Morning, Amara," Sarah said, her face lighting up with a genuine smile as she saw the tall woman in faded scrubs approach. "Look at you. You look like you just went 15 rounds with an iron lung. Are you sure you're up for this today? Your 30 days were up yesterday, right?" "I am fine, Sarah," Amara said, sitting down in the chair opposite the desk and presenting her left arm. "The schedule is the schedule. If I do not do it today, my extra hours next week will make it difficult to come back before the mid-month rush." Sarah pulled up Amara's file on her computer. "AB negative. Every time I see your chart, I feel like we should have a brass band playing when you walk in. We had a trauma case come into the ER 3 days ago that wiped out our entire reserve of negative universals. If you hadn't shown up today, our inventory for rare groups would be at 0. Then it is good that I am here," Amara said. She followed Sarah to the row of blue chairs. She settled back into the vinyl, letting her head rest against the small pillow. Sarah wrapped a thick rubber tourniquet around Amara's upper bicep, tapping the skin of her forearm until a thick, blue vein rose like a cord beneath the dark surface. "You know the drill," Sarah said, tearing open an alcohol prep pad and rubbing the skin in concentric circles. A little pinch. Amara did not look as the 16-gauge needle pierced the skin. She felt the sharp, familiar bite of steel, followed by the dull, throbbing pressure as her blood began to move through the clear plastic tubing. It flowed down into the collection bag resting on the scale below the chair, the machine rocking back and forth with a rhythmic, mechanical click to prevent coagulation. "Do you ever think about it?" Sarah asked, adjusting the tape that secured the needle to Amara's skin. "Where it goes, I mean. We're a specialized kids' hospital. Most of what you give stays right here in this building. It's going into some little boy or girl whose parents are probably sitting upstairs praying for a miracle." Amara watched the dark red fluid fill the clear plastic pouch. "My mother used to tell me a story when I was small, back in Accra," she said, her voice dropping to a soft, melodic cadence that seemed to quiet the sterile room. She said that when God made the world, he realized that the rich people would buy up all the land, the food, and the clean water. They would leave nothing for the poor but the dirt. So, God put the life inside the blood. He made it so that no matter how many millions of dollars a man has, he cannot buy an extra heartbeat from the sky. He must receive it from another human being. She said blood is the only true democracy we have left. When you give it, you don't give charity. You give the only thing that makes us equal. Your mother sounds like a wise woman, Amara, Sarah noted gently. She is a proud woman, Amara said, her gaze drifting to the white acoustic tiles of the ceiling. But her body is failing her now. Her kidneys do not work. Every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, I must take her to the clinic on Devon Avenue. She sits there for 4 hours while a machine does what her own flesh cannot. It costs more than we have. Sometimes, when I am sitting here, I feel a great anger that the world is so unequal, that she must suffer because we do not have the money for the private doctors or the top tier of the insurance network. But you still come here, Sarah said. You give this away for free while you're drowning in medical bills. Because if I allow the bitterness to stop my hand from giving, then the bitterness wins, Amara said, her eyes turning back to the clicking scale. If I keep my blood inside my own body out of spite for the rich, it does not save my mother. It only makes the world a darker place for someone else's child. We must protect our own goodness, Sarah. If we lose that, we have nothing left to give anyone. The scale gave a sharp, electronic beep, indicating that the target weight of 450 grams had been achieved. Sarah stepped forward, clamped the tubing with a pair of stainless steel forceps, and deftly withdrew the needle, pressing a firm pad of sterile cotton against the puncture site, commanding her to hold it tight for 5 minutes. Sarah walked away to process the unit, labeling the bag with a barcode sticker that carried no name, no history, no race, and no economic status. It was simply a unit of life, certified sterile, typed as AB negative, and ready for transport. Amara sat in the chair for the required 15 minutes. She drank her small cup of generic orange juice and ate 2 saltine crackers, savoring the sugar as it hit her bloodstream to counteract the sudden, slight lightheadedness that always followed a donation. Then, she stood up, pressed a small strip of beige adhesive tape over the cotton ball on her arm, pulled her worn winter jacket over her shoulders, and walked out into the cold Chicago rain. By January, the winter had settled over the city with a brutal, bone-crushing intensity. The wind off the lake was a knife that cut through Amara's cheap wool coat as she waited at the bus stop every morning. Her mother's condition had deteriorated from stage 4 to stage 5, end-stage renal disease. The nephrologist at the county clinic, a tired-eyed man named Dr. Chun, had been blunt during their last consultation, explaining that the dialysis was just keeping her head above water and that her clearance levels were dropping. Her heart was starting to show signs of fluid overload, and she needed a transplant within the next 6 months, or her long-term survival window would close permanently. He explained that to be listed on the active UNO's registry, they had to demonstrate financial sustainability for the post-transplant care. The anti-rejection medications alone cost between $2,000 and $3,000 a month, and they are lifelong. The hospital's financial clearance committee wouldn't clear her for the active list unless they could show a dedicated escrow account or an insurance supplement of at least $25,000 up front to guarantee she wouldn't reject the organ because she couldn't afford the pills. $25,000. To Amara, it might as well have been $25 million. Her savings account held exactly $412. Every cent of her paycheck was devoured by their rent, the co-pays for the dialysis transport vans, and the renal-specific nutritional supplements her mother required to keep her protein levels from bottoming out. That night, Amara worked her shift on the 3rd floor with the numb, mechanical focus of a ghost. She did not speak to anyone or listen to the gossip in the break room. She simply scrubbed, lifted, and emptied, her mind revolving around that single, impossible number. At 2 a.m., the floor supervisor, Marcus, approached her cart with a slip of paper in his hand, telling her they were short-handed up on 7 and that she was floating up there for the rest of her shift. Amara looked up, noting that she hadn't been oriented on the VIP pavilion's specific service protocols. Marcus simply laughed dryly, telling her it was the same trash in nicer bins, reminding her to use the specialized clear liner bags, and to keep her cart completely out of sight inside the service alcove. Amara adjusted her badge, left her standard cart in the third-floor bay, and took the service elevator up to the 7th floor. The transition was jarring. The air here was warmer, carrying a faint, expensive scent of lavender and clean linen instead of the sharp, chemical tang of bleach that defined the lower floors. The hallway was carpeted in a thick, dense wool that muffled the sound of her footsteps. She found the service alcove, loaded her arms with the specialized, heavy-duty clear waist liners, and began her rounds. She moved from room to room with practiced discretion. The patients here were different. Older men in silk pajamas, sleek women sleeping under private cashmere throws, their rooms filled with laptops, high-end tech accessories, and fresh-cut orchids. She reached room 714. The door was slightly ajar, a warm, blue light spilling out into the darkened corridor. She knocked softly, according to the VIP protocol she had been handed by the floor nurse, and pushed the door open. The room was silent except for the low, rhythmic hum of a high-end medical air mattress and the occasional, soft beep of an infusion pump. In the bed lay the small boy she had heard the nurses talking about, Elijah. His face was pale, almost translucent under the blue glow of a rocket ship night light that was plugged into the baseboard. Beside the bed sat Julian Fairfax. He had fallen asleep in his slate-gray leather chair, his head tilted back against the headrest, a thin sheen of sweat on his forehead. His silver laptop sat half-closed on the table beside him. Amara stepped softly onto the hardwood floor, her movements fluid and silent. She walked to the large waste bin near the bathroom door, knelt down, and began to remove the clear plastic liner. As she lifted the bag, her eyes accidentally drifted to the chrome 4-pole beside the bed. Hanging from the hook was an empty, crumpled plastic bag. The label was facing her, carrying the bold, blue letters of the St. Jude Central Blood Bank. In the center of the label, printed in sharp black ink, was the group type, AB negative. Below it, the processing date matched exactly 36 hours ago, the precise time her own blood had been cleared through the hospital's laboratory testing system. Amara stood frozen, her fingers clutching the plastic trash liner. Her scientific training, the years of pre-med lectures that had been buried under years of menial labor, reasserted themselves in an instant. She knew the metrics of the blood bank. She knew that AB-negative units were rare enough that they were rarely kept in inventory for more than 24 hours without being cross-matched to a specific patient. She looked from the empty bag down to the small, sleeping boy with the prominent forehead and the slightly jaundiced skin. This is him, she realized, her breath catching in her throat. This is the child, the billionaire's son. Elijah stirred in his sleep, his small eyelids fluttering open. He looked across the dark room, his large, dark eyes fixing on Amara as she stood by the waste bin. He did not look frightened. He looked curious, his small hand reaching out from beneath the white duvet to touch the edge of his bedside table. "Are you the story lady?" he whispered, his voice tiny, raspy from the dry room air. Amara blinked, her heart pounding against her ribs. She looked at Julian, who remained deeply asleep, his breathing heavy and regular, then stepped closer to the bed, her voice dropping to a soft, comforting murmur. "No, little one. I am just the person who cleans the room. Why are you awake?" "The machine keeps making noise," Elijah whispered, pointing to the infusion pump. "And it's dark. Sometimes, a lady comes at night and tells me about the ocean. My daddy says she's the one who gives me the magic juice to make my blood strong. Are you her?" Amara looked at the empty blood bag hanging above his head, then down at his small, fragile face. She felt a profound, aching warmth open up in her chest, a sensation so sharp it felt almost like physical pain. She had spent 2 years giving away parts of her body to a database, to a barcode, to an abstract concept of charity. To see that abstract concept turn into a 4-year-old boy with dark eyes and a rocket ship nightlight completely shattered something inside her. "No, sweetheart," Amara whispered, her hand reaching out automatically, her thumb lightly grazing the back of his small, warm hand where the 4 cannula was taped down. "I am not the story lady, but I know she wishes you to be very strong. She wants you to sleep now so your body can do its work. Will she come back next month?" Elijah asked, his eyelids dropping lower, heavy with the sedation of his therapies. "She will always come back," Amara said, her voice shaking slightly as she tucked the edge of his blanket back over his shoulder. As long as you need her, she will be here. I promise you. Elijah gave a small, contented sigh and closed his eyes, his breathing slowing as he drifted back into the deep, restorative sleep of the transfused. Amara stood there for a long moment, watching him. She didn't look at Julian Fairfax, his $4,000 leather chair, or his high-end laptop. She simply took her trash bag, walked out into the corridor, and closed the door behind her. With a soft, silent click, the wall of anonymity did not shatter from a calculated breach of security. It cracked because human beings are prone to fatigue and the careless intimacy of shared secrets. It was a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks after Amara's float shift on the 7th floor. Julian Fairfax had been at the hospital for 48 hours straight, his executive team patching into his laptop via encrypted links while he sat by his son's bedside. He left room 714 to walk down to the ground floor cafeteria to wash the taste of copper out of his mouth. As he reached the 3rd floor elevator alcove, the car stopped, the doors sliding open to reveal a pair of nurses from the pediatric hematology unit, Brenda and an older woman named Clara. They were deep in conversation, their voices carrying that casual tone that hospital staff use when they think the hallways are empty. I'm telling you, she's crazy, Brenda was saying, leaning against the handrail of the elevator car. She came into the blood bank again this morning before her shift started. Sarah told me her iron levels were right on the line, barely an 11.5. Sarah tried to tell her to wait another 2 weeks, to let her bone marrow catch up, but she wouldn't hear of it. Clara asked why the rush, and Brenda muttered as the elevator doors began to close, because she heard through the graveyard shift tech that the Fairfax kids' numbers were dipping again. She's been keeping that boy alive for 24 months with her own veins. Amara's the only regular AB negative we've got left in the registry who hasn't moved away. If she crashes her own system, that kid up on 7 is going to have to rely on out-of-state couriers, and you know how long that takes when the weather gets bad at O'Hare. The doors snapped shut, the elevator car dropping toward the basement. Julian Fairfax stood frozen in the 3rd floor corridor. The air seemed to leave his lungs all at once, his hands tightening into fists inside his coat pockets. Amara. The name hit him with the force of an accusation. It was not a code or an alphanumeric string on a secure server. It was a name he had seen on a plastic ID badge attached to a woman in faded scrubs who pushed a gray rubber bucket through the lobby every single morning at 7 a.m. He didn't go to the cafeteria. He turned around and walked straight back to the elevator, taking it down to the basement service corridor, his mind racing as pieces of a jigsaw puzzle fell into place with terrifying speed. He walked into the support services administrative office. The space was small, smelling of old paper and stale donuts. Behind the desk sat Marcus Webb, his tablet in hand, his face tightening into an immediate, sycophantic smile as he recognized the billionaire CEO. Mr. Fairfax, Marcus said, standing up quickly. Can I help you with something? Is there an issue with the environmental services on 7? I can send up a team immediately. Julian cut him off, demanding the employment file for a worker named Amara. Marcus stammered about personnel files being confidential under HR policy, but Julian stepped closer, leaning forward until his face was inches away, advising Marcus that he funded the retirement account of the CEO of the entire hospital system and sat on the board of trustees. Within 30 seconds, he could have the HR director deliver the file, or he could have Marcus's entire position deleted from the annual budget. Marcus's face went white. He turned the screen toward him, revealing the digital profile of Amara Osei, with a low-resolution webcam photograph of a woman with clear, dark eyes and a strong, unyielding face. Julian read the text rapidly. Age 35, environmental services specialist, hired in October 2021, previous pre-med education at University of Illinois Chicago withdrawn without a degree, and an emergency contact field listing a dependent parent, Denise Osei, currently a stage 5 chronic kidney disease patient at the St. Jude Renal Care Clinic. Julian stared at the screen, a cold, heavy weight settling in his chest as he realized this woman was draining her own bone marrow to keep his son breathing for free. He demanded to know where she was, and Marcus stammered that she was finishing her shift on 3 East, clearing the clinical waste before the 7 a.m. turnover. Julian turned on his heel and walked out of the office. The parking lot of St. Jude Children's Memorial at 6:15 a.m. was a desolate expanse of gray concrete and yellow sodium lights. The cold was historic, the kind of deep, polar vortex frost that turns moisture into ice the moment it leaves the lungs. Amara walked through the sliding glass doors of the east exit, her thin wool scarf wrapped 3 times around her face, her hands shoved deep into her coat pockets. Her left arm throbbed with a dull, persistent ache where Sarah had drawn her blood an hour earlier. She was lightheaded, her vision slightly blurred at the edges from the low iron counts she had ignored to complete the donation. She took 3 steps toward the concrete island where the CTA bus stop was located, her eyes fixed on the pavement to avoid the patches of black ice. Amara. The voice was loud, clear, cutting through the low hum of the hospital's rooftop ventilation units. She stopped, turning her head slowly. Standing near a long, black luxury sedan parked in the fire lane was Julian Fairfax. He didn't wear a coat. He stood in his tailored wool trousers and a charcoal cashmere sweater, his arms hanging loose at his sides, his face pale and distorted by the harsh yellow light above him. Steam rose from his breath, disappearing instantly into the freezing air. Amara pulled down her scarf, her dark eyes narrowing with immediate, defensive caution. "Mr. Fairfax? What are you doing out here? Is there an issue with the room? The morning shift tech should be up on 7 by now." Julian didn't answer. He stepped off the curb, walking toward her across the asphalt, his movements uneven and his hands shaking slightly from the overwhelming weight of what he was carrying. He stopped when he was 3 feet away from her, staring into her face. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice raw and cracking in the winter air. Amara kept her face expressionless, her hand tightening around the strap of her canvas bag. "I do not know what you are talking about, sir. I am a floor tech. I am not allowed to discuss clinical matters with family members." "Stop it," Julian whispered, stepping closer. "Don't do that. I know, Amara. I know about the AB negative. I know about the 24 months. I know you're the one who's been keeping Elijah alive. I know everything." The silence that followed was absolute. The wind blew a sheet of dry, frozen snow across the parking lot, the crystals clicking against the tires of the parked cars. Amara felt the blood rush to her ears, her lightheadedness returning with sudden, dangerous force. She looked away, staring at the glowing red sign of the emergency room entrance across the lot. "You should not have looked for me, Mr. Fairfax," she said, her voice dropping to a low, hard tone that carried the full weight of her dignity. "The blood bank guidelines are clear. Anonymity is a federal protection. You have broken the law by accessing my file." "I don't care about the law," Julian shouted, his control finally snapping. Tears rose in his eyes, freezing instantly on his eyelashes as he looked at her. "My son was dying 3 nights ago, Amara. His hemoglobin was at 5. We called every repository in 3 states, and they had nothing. And you walked in here after a 12-hour shift, with your own system already depleted, and you gave him your blood again. You risked your own life to save a boy you don't even know. And you expect me to sit up on the 7th floor and pretend you don't exist? You expect me to write a check to the hospital foundation and call it a day? I did not do it for you," Amara said, her eyes snapping back to meet his with a fierce, unyielding light. "I did it for the boy. He is 4 years old. He has done nothing wrong to the world. He deserves to have his tomorrow. I want to save your mother, Amara," Julian said, his voice dropping to an urgent, desperate plea. He reached into his pocket, pulling out his smartphone, his fingers flying across the screen. "I know about the stage 5 renal failure. I know about Dr. Chun. I know about the $25,000 you need to get her on the UNO's registry. Look at this. I've already set up a dedicated trust account with my private bankers. There is $500,000 sitting in it right now. It will pay for the transplant, the private surgeons at Northwestern, the lifelong anti-rejection, medications, everything. I will buy you a house in Gold Coast. I will reinstate your tuition at UIC. You can be a doctor, Amara. You can have the life you gave up. Just let me do this. Let me pay you back for what you've given my son." Amara looked at the glowing screen of the phone he was holding out to her, where the rows of zeros on the banking application reflected off her dark skin. She looked at it for a long, agonizing moment. She thought of her mother sitting in the cold room on Devon Avenue, her body swollen with the fluid her kidneys couldn't process. She thought of the $25,000 that stood between her mother and a grave. Then, slowly, deliberately, she reached out her gloved hand and pushed Julian's phone down, forcing him to lower his arm. "No," she said. Julian stared at her, his mouth opening slightly, his mind refusing to process the syllable. "What do you mean, no?" "Amara, listen to me. This is your mother's life. This is your future. I am offering you everything you need to survive. Why are you doing this?" "Because if I take your $500,000, Mr. Fairfax, then my blood becomes an investment," Amara said, her voice steady and clear, sounding like iron striking flint in the freezing parking lot. "It means that for 2 years, I was not giving a gift to a dying child. It means I was waiting for the rich father to find out so he could write me a check. It turns my mother's survival into a transaction. It means the system is right, that everything in America is for sale if you have enough zeros on your phone. I am not trying to buy you, Amara." Julian cried, his face twisted with agony. "I am trying to thank you. I am trying to show gratitude." "This is not gratitude, sir," Amara said, stepping closer until she was the one looking down at him. "This is leverage. You want to clear your conscience because it terrifies you to be dependent on a poor woman who cleans your floors. You want to write a check so you can feel like you are the master of your son's life again. But you are not. God made it so that you need me. You need my blood, and you cannot buy it from me. I will give it to Elijah next month and the month after that, because he is a child and I love him. But I will not sell it to you." Julian stood there, his chest heaving, his hands hanging loose at his sides. For 46 years, he had lived in a universe where money was the universal solvent that could smooth over any operational difficulty, by any talent, or bypass any regulation. And now, standing in the dirt and ice of a hospital parking lot, he had met a woman who earned less in a year than his office furniture cost, and she had just rendered his $4 billion completely obsolete. "Then what do you want from me?" Julian whispered, his voice cracking with a profound, terrifying sense of emptiness. "What am I supposed to do with this?" Amara looked at the massive hospital building behind him, its thousands of windows glowing with a cold, pale white light against the dark winter sky. "You want to do something with your power, Mr. Fairfax?" she asked, her voice dropping to a low, melodic cadence. "Then look around you. Don't just look at the woman who has the specific group code your son needs. Look at the people who are in this building right now, saving lives with their bare hands for $15 an hour while you walk past them like they are glass. Look at the aides who hold the children when they are throwing up from chemotherapy. Look at the janitors who scrub the blood off the floors so your doctors do not slip. Look at the system that treats them as disposable grease for your machines. You want to thank me? Change that. Use your millions to make this place see them. If you can do that, then maybe you will understand what a gift really means." She pulled her wool scarf back over her face, turned away from him, and walked toward the concrete island just as the heavy, rumbling shape of the CTA bus pulled up to the curb, its headlights cutting through the dark winter mist. She stepped onto the bus, the doors closing behind her with a sharp, pneumatic hiss, leaving the billionaire alone on his knees in the freezing dark. The realization of insignificance is the most violent experience a powerful man can undergo. Julian Fairfax did not return to his office downtown or log into the venture capital review portal. He went back to the 7th floor, walked into room 714, and sat down in his slate gray leather chair. He didn't open his laptop. He simply stared at his son's face, his mind repeating Amara's words like a loop of broken code. For 3 weeks, Julian lived in a state of operational paralysis. His executive team thought he was having a nervous breakdown brought on by the stress of Elijah's illness, but Julian was rebuilding. For the first time in his life, he wasn't looking at data points as abstractions. He was looking at the human architecture that supported them. He began to notice things he had been culturally blind to for 46 years. The woman who brought the linen carts at 4 a.m., an older Latina named Maria whose wrists were wrapped in copper support bands to combat carpal tunnel syndrome. The young African-American man, named James, who drove the patient transport beds down to the radiology units, speaking to the frightened children in a soft, funny voice that made them laugh. He found out James worked 16 hours a day across 2 different hospitals to pay for his daughter's asthma medications. The system was held together by a massive, invisible infrastructure of exploited devotion. The CNAs and the support staff were not gears. They were the actual flesh of the institution, and the system was consuming them to maximize the operating margins of the foundations. Julian called a meeting of his private legal counsel and the executive committee of the Medicor Foundation in the penthouse boardroom of his corporate headquarters on Michigan Avenue. "We are shifting our philanthropic and developmental parameters," Julian announced, throwing a thick binder onto the glass conference table. His chief financial officer, Henderson, adjusted his glasses, noting that they were scheduled to fund the new automated diagnostic wing at St. Jude next quarter for $40 million, which gave them primary naming rights and a significant tax write-off. "Cancel the diagnostic wing," Julian said flatly. "They will get the $40 million, but it won't be for machines. We are establishing the Invisible Heroes Initiative. It is a permanent endowment administered directly by a third-party trust. First, every support staff member at St. Jude Children's Memorial, every CNA, environmental services specialist, laundry worker, and dietary aide will receive an immediate, across-the-board wage increase of $4 an hour, funded entirely by the endowment's dividend yield. This is a permanent structural adjustment to bring their baseline compensation above the local living wage index. Second, the foundation is establishing the Denise O'Shea Medical Education Scholarship. It will be an initial $10 million fund open exclusively to non-exempt support staff workers within the regional hospital system who wish to pursue nursing or medical school degrees. It will cover full tuition, books, and a monthly stipend equal to their full-time wage so they don't have to work extra hours while studying pathology. And third, we are redirecting 20% of Medicor AI's core engineering team away from commercial pathogen modeling. They are going to build a national, real-time rare blood type registry, an automated, zero-fee platform that tracks every voluntary donor with rare phenotypes and links them directly to hospital inventory needs across the country. We're going to take the blind spots out of the rescue system, and we are going to do it for free. Henderson warned that this would drag down their projected commercial margins by at least 7% and that the board would look at it as an ideological vanity project. "Then let them look at it," Julian said, standing up and buttoning his jacket. "The board can replace me if they have the votes. But until they do, the code belongs to me, and the money is going where the life is. Prepare the contracts by Friday." The launch of the Invisible Heroes Initiative was held in the main auditorium of St. Jude Children's Memorial on a cold, crisp afternoon in March. The room was packed to capacity, 400 people sitting in the tiered velvet seats. In the front rows sat the hospital's senior board members, the chief of surgery, and local political leaders in expensive suits, but the remaining two-thirds of the hall was occupied by women in blue and gray scrubs, men in industrial maintenance uniforms, and dietary workers with hairnets still tucked into their pockets. Amara sat in the very back row, near the exit doors. She had not wanted to come, but Dr. Mbeki had personally intervened, telling her that her absence would be considered a direct slight to the clinical department. Julian Fairfax stood at the podium, the stage lighting reflecting off his silver temples, his face calm and unreadable as he looked out over the crowd without notes. "2 months ago, my son almost died in room 714, Julian began, his voice echoing through the state-of-the-art acoustic system of the hall. "He didn't almost die because our technology failed. Our algorithms were perfect. The predictive models were running with 99% efficiency. He almost died because this hospital was out of blood. We were out of the specific, rare human element needed to keep his heart beating. My son is alive today because of a woman who works in this building," Julian said, his eyes scanning the back rows until they found Amara's dark, still face. "A woman who earns $15 an hour. A woman who spent 12 hours cleaning up the waste and the blood of other people's children before sitting in a vinyl chair in the basement to drain her own veins for free. I walked past that woman 100 times over the last 2 years. I looked through her as if she were a piece of glass, because the culture I belong to teaches me that people who wear faded scrubs and push mop buckets are part of the background. We treat them as part of the operational machinery of our lives, rather than as human beings. We are here today to announce a fundamental shift in the architecture of this institution. The Medicor Foundation is investing $40 million to ensure that the people who hold this hospital together are no longer invisible. We are raising wages, we are funding scholarships, and we are building systems to honor the true savers of life. And we are naming our primary medical scholarship after a woman who taught her daughter that blood is the only true democracy we have left, the Denise O'Shea Medical Scholarship. The back two-thirds of the auditorium erupted into a sudden, chaotic roar of applause. Women in scrubs stood up, their voices rising in shouts of emotional release. Janitors clapped their rough, calloused hands together. Amara did not stand up. She sat perfectly still in her velvet chair, her face lowering into her hands as she wept quietly, her tears soaking into the fabric of her cheap wool scarf. She wasn't weeping because her name was being spoken by a billionaire. She was weeping because across town, in the small room on Devon Avenue, her mother was listening to the broadcast on a small digital link Dr. Mbeki had set up for her. She was weeping because the words spoken in a freezing parking lot at 6 a.m. had turned into a concrete reality for every person who had ever been invisible. Time in a hospital moves in two distinct tempos: the frantic, high-stakes metronome of the emergency room and the slow, geological crawl of chronic recovery. For years passed like a single, continuous shift. It was a bright, blistering Saturday morning in June. The Grand Convocation Hall of the University of Illinois Chicago was filled with the heavy, majestic sound of an organ playing Elgar's Pomp and Circumstance. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and the collective nervous energy of 200 medical students waiting to cross the stage. Amara Osei stood in the center of the alphabetical line, her black graduation gown draped over her shoulders, the green velvet hood of the College of Medicine pinned to her collar. She was 39 years old. Her dark skin was smooth, though the lines of experience around her eyes had deepened into permanent markers of character. Her hands, once rough and split from high-grade hospital disinfectants, were now soft and precise, the nails clean and trimmed to a neat, professional line. Amara Osei, the dean's voice boomed over the public address system. The audience did not give the standard, polite applause that had greeted the previous graduates. The entire left section of the auditorium, a block of over 50 people wearing St. Jude Hospital badges and matching blue ribbons, stood up all at once, their cheers and applause shaking the rafters of the old building. Among them was Brenda, her eyes red from crying, and even Marcus Webb, who was clapping with an awkward, uncharacteristic enthusiasm. Amara walked across the polished oak stage, her posture straight, her head held high, and accepted the heavy, rolled parchment scroll from the dean's hands. Doctor of Medicine, specialization in pediatric hematology. She turned to face the crowd, her eyes automatically tracking down to the fifth row of the VIP family section. Sitting there, in a high-back wheelchair upholstered in bright Kent cloth, was Denise O'Shea. She was 74 years old now, her face thin but her eyes flashing with a brilliant, triumphant light. 4 years earlier, 3 months after the launch of the initiative, an anonymous donor kidney had become available through the regional network, a perfect HLA match that had been processed with a quiet, administrative speed that carried the subtle, unmistakable hallmark of Julian Fairfax's logistical influence. The surgery had been flawless, and the post-operative care was paid for by a trust that carried no name but possessed infinite reserves. Beside Denise sat Elijah Fairfax. He was 10 years old now, tall for his age, his skin clear and carrying the healthy, vibrant color of a boy whose bone marrow had finally achieved a state of permanent remission. The combination therapies developed by Medicor AI's new research registry, informed by clinical observations Amara herself had compiled during her residency rotations, had successfully turned off the automated treason of his immune system 2 years prior. Elijah was holding something in his lap, a small, square frame containing a piece of creased, yellowed printer paper. It was the original crayon drawing of the Blood Lady, the stick figure with brown skin and big hands holding a red heart. He lifted the frame high above his head, his face splitting into a wide, brilliant smile as he looked up at the stage. Amara looked at the boy, then down at her own hands, the hands that had mopped the floors, that had emptied the pans, that had opened their veins 24 times to keep a stranger's child breathing in the dark. Those hands were now licensed to carry a scalpel and a stethoscope. They were the exact same hands, moving with the exact same purpose, but the world finally knew their name. The concept of a closed ecosystem is the fundamental truth of biology. What goes around eventually comes around. Dr. Amara Osei walked through the sliding glass doors of St. Jude Children's Memorial Hospital at 6:45 a.m. on a Tuesday in November. She didn't wear scrubs today. She wore a sharp gray wool suit under a crisp, long white coat that carried her name embroidered in green silk above the breast pocket. Dr. A. Osei, MD. She took the main passenger elevator up to the third floor, the general pediatric ward where she had spent 10 years of her life as an invisible ghost. The floor had changed. The scuffed yellow walls had been repainted a clean, bright seafoam green. The old television monitors had been replaced with sleek, digital displays, and the staff break room had been expanded to include private rest alcoves for the support workers during their breaks. She walked past the central nursing station, nodding to the shift leaders who were completing their morning reports. As she reached the corner near the supply room, she saw a young woman pushing a gray rubber maintenance cart. The woman was young, perhaps 22, her dark skin slick with sweat, her posture slumped with that specific, crushing exhaustion that comes from working the final hour of a 12-hour shift. Her plastic ID badge read, "Support staff." Amara stopped, her white coat catching the light of the fluorescent fixtures. She didn't walk past. She stepped into the center of the corridor, blocking the cart's path gently. The young woman looked up, her eyes wide with defensive anxiety as she saw the attending physician standing in front of her. "I'm sorry, doctor. Am I blocking the way? I can move the cart into the alcove immediately." Amara smiled, a soft, deep expression that seemed to warm the sterile space of the hallway, reaching down until her soft, professional hand lightly covered the young woman's rough fingers where they clutched the handle of the mop. "What is your name?" Amara asked. Gently. The girl blinked, her mouth opening slightly in surprise. "My name is Elena, doctor." "Elena." Amara Laplai. "John Ko Tram Suong Ton Mot Nip Umi." "You are doing beautiful work today, Elena. The floor is clean. The space is safe. Do not ever let anyone in this building make you feel like you are invisible. You are the foundation of this house. Do you understand me?" Elena stared at her, her eyes blinking rapidly as a sudden, unexpected tear rose and spilled over her cheek. She looked from Amara's face down to the green embroidery on her white coat, then back up again. "Thank you, doctor," she whispered, her shoulders straightening slightly, her grip on the mop loosening as she felt the dignity of the recognition move through her spine. "Go have your juice and your crackers, Elena," Amara said with a wink. "The morning shift is here. Your work is done." Amara turned and walked toward the elevator to take it up to the 7th floor to start her clinical rounds. As she walked, she felt the rhythmic, steady throb of her own pulse in her wrist, the silent, 5-liter river of life navigating its way through her body. It was the same river that was currently navigating through Elijah Fairfax across town, the same river that held the entire fragile world together. It was a democracy of cells, blind to wealth, deaf to power, and waiting for anyone willing to open their eyes and see it. This moving story reminds us that true impact doesn't always come from massive wealth or complex technology, but from the quiet, unprompted kindness of human beings who choose to look out for one another. If Amara's incredible journey from an invisible janitor to the very doctor who saved the boy she had been keeping alive touched your heart, please hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and share this video right now with someone who needs to see the power of selflessness. We want to hear from you. When was the last time you took a moment to truly appreciate an overlooked worker in your daily life, or considered donating blood to save a stranger? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Consider becoming a regular blood donor today, especially if you have a rare type. And until next time, keep giving, keep seeing the invisible heroes around you, and never underestimate the life-saving power flowing through your veins.